He looked at her body, smirked at his bodyguards, and muttered an insult in Arabic, thinking the heavy-set waitress pouring his wine was completely clueless. He was wrong. Chloe leaned in, stared into his cold, dead eyes, and replied in perfect Arabic, calling him a pathetic, insecure coward. Working at the Astor Room on Park Avenue wasn't just a job for Chloe Jenkins, it was a nightly performance. The clientele consisted of Wall Street titans, tech billionaires, and men whose names were whispered rather than spoken. As a size 22 woman in a world that exclusively praised the slender and the delicate, her presence in the elite dining room was an anomaly. Chloe was acutely aware of how she was perceived. She felt the disdainful glances from the socialites in their sleek Saint Laurent dresses, and she saw the invisible calculations the hostess made when assigning her the corner tables, hoping to keep her bulk out of the central sightlines. But she was the best server they had. She could memorize a 12-person order without a notepad. She knew the vintage of every bottle in the wine cellar, and she desperately needed the money. It was a Tuesday evening when the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The low hum of affluent conversation abruptly died out, replaced by a suffocating, tense silence. Mr. Harrison, their impeccably groomed floor manager, turned the color of old parchment. Elijah Costa had arrived. Everyone in the city knew who Elijah Costa was, even if the police could never definitively prove it. He was the head of a sprawling, ruthless syndicate that controlled half the shipping ports on the East Coast. He didn't look like a mobster from the movies. There were no flashy tracksuits or broken noses. Elijah looked like a lethal corporate raider. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit that probably cost more than Chloe's annual rent, and a platinum Patek Philippe Nautilus gleamed quietly on his wrist. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp jawlines and dark, predatory eyes, flanked by 3 massive men who scanned the room with professional paranoia. Mr. F.P. Harrison practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to greet them, ushering the group to table 4, the most secluded, luxurious booth in the house. It was Chloe's section. "Chloe," Harrison hissed, grabbing her arm so tightly his nails dug into her skin. "Do not mess this up. Do not speak unless spoken to. If he wants a steak well done, you compliment his palate. Understand?" She nodded, smoothing down her black apron over her wide hips, taking a deep breath to steady the erratic thumping in her chest. Grabbing the leather-bound menus and a pitcher of iced water, she made her way to the lion's den. As she approached, Elijah didn't even acknowledge her presence. He was speaking in low tones to his right-hand man, a scarred brute named Dominic. Chloe distributed the menus with practiced efficiency, her movements smooth, despite her size. Stepping in to pour the water, she leaned across the heavy mahogany table. It was a tight squeeze. Her hip brushed against the edge of the table, causing a slight rattle of the crystal glasses. It was a microscopic error, but in Elijah Costa's world, microscopic errors were capital offenses. Elijah stopped talking. He slowly turned his head, his dark eyes raking up and down her body. He didn't hide his disgust. It was a look she had received 1,000 times before, the look that reduced her from a human being trying to make a living into an offensive obstacle taking up too much space. Leaning back, he picked up his glass and smirked at Dominic. "Anzuru ila hadi hayal bakara," Elijah muttered in flawless, rolling Arabic, his tone dripping with arrogant amusement. "La ajab an al-kidma batiya. La yumkinuha hata al-mashi." Look at this cow. No wonder the service is slow. She can barely even walk. Dominic chuckled, a low, cruel sound. They relaxed, entirely confident in their secret mockery. Assuming the heavy-set American waitress in a Manhattan steakhouse couldn't possibly understand the dialect of the Lebanese underworld they frequently dealt with. Chloe's blood ran cold and then it boiled, She had spent her entire life swallowing insults. She had swallowed the cruelty of high school bullies, the passive-aggressive comments of her mother, and the daily indignities of existing in a fat body in a superficial city. But something about this man with his billions in the bank and blood on his hands, using a foreign language to cowardly insult her body to his friend, snapped the last thread of her patience. She stopped pouring the water. With deliberate force, she set the heavy silver pitcher down on the table with a loud, resounding thud that echoed through the quiet dining room. Elijah's eyes snapped to hers, narrowing dangerously at the breach of etiquette. Chloe leaned over the table, bringing her face inches from his, planting her hands firmly on the mahogany. She looked straight into his cold, dead eyes. Al-Jaban fakat huwa man yahtabi yuhaldua layatawakau min alakarin famaha, she said, her voice low, steady, and perfectly accented in the exact same Arabic dialect. The blood drained from Dominic's face. Elijah froze, the smirk dying instantly on his lips. Refusing to break eye contact, Chloe switched to English, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. If you have a problem with my size, Mr. Costa, you can be a man and say it to my face. Or does that expensive suit not come with a spine? A collective gasp echoed from the surrounding tables. Mr. Harrison dropped a tray of champagne flutes near the bar. The shattering of glass was the only sound in the suffocating silence. Dominic's hand darted beneath his jacket, reaching for a weapon, his eyes locked on her with murderous intent. She stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she kept her chin high. She was fat. She was a waitress, but she was not a joke. Elijah slowly raised his hand, gesturing for Dominic to stand down. He didn't look angry. In fact, the coldness in his eyes had been replaced by something far more terrifying, utter fascination. A slow, dark smile crept across his face, revealing a flash of white teeth. "Well," Elijah murmured, his voice a rich baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "It seems I made a miscalculation. Chloe fully expected to be dead by midnight, or at the very least unemployed. The moment the words had left her mouth, regret had threatened to drown her, but stubborn pride kept her feet planted." After her outburst, Elijah Costa had simply ordered the dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, and a bottle of their most expensive Barolo. He hadn't said another word to her for the rest of the evening, but she could feel his eyes on her. Every time she walked past his table, every time she carried a heavy tray balancing plates of oysters and filet mignon, his gaze tracked her not with the disgust he had initially shown, but with the sharp calculating intensity of a predator studying a new, complex puzzle. When he finally paid the bill, he didn't use a black Amex. He left a stack of crisp $100 bills on the table. $5,000. Tucked beneath the money was a heavily embossed napkin. Written in black ink, in elegant Arabic script, was a single sentence: "Courage is rare. We will see if it lasts." Mr. Harrison had dragged her into his office the second the Mafia boss taillights disappeared down Park Avenue. He was hyperventilating, threatening to fire her, blackball her from the New York restaurant scene, and personally hand her over to the mob. But the next morning, Harrison called her back. He was pale and shaking. "You're not fired," Harrison had whispered, looking terrified. "Mr. Costa's office called. He's dining with us again tonight, and he specifically requested you as his server. Only you." That was how the twisted game began. For the next 3 weeks, Elijah Costa became a regular. 3 nights a week he would occupy table 4. Sometimes he came with his intimidating associates. Sometimes he came entirely alone. And every single time he demanded her service. He was testing her. He would order complex off-menu items, demanding wine pairings that required deep knowledge of obscure vineyards. She delivered perfectly. He would try to intimidate her, staring at her in silence for minutes on end while she poured his wine. Chloe stared right back, refusing to let her hands tremble. He never mentioned her weight again, nor did he repeat the insult. Instead, he probed her mind. Where did a girl from the Midwest learn to speak the language of the Levantine underworld with such perfect syntax? He asked one rainy Thursday night, swirling the red wine in his glass. Language apps, she lied smoothly, wiping down the table next to him. Elijah chuckled, a dark, rich sound. You're a terrible liar, Chloe. Your accent is regional, specifically the southern suburbs of Beirut. You didn't learn that from a phone screen. You learned it on the streets. Her breath hitched and she quickly turned away, her heart pounding. He was getting too close. Nobody in New York knew the truth about her past. They saw a fat, quiet woman who worked long shifts to pay rent in Queens. They didn't know that her real name wasn't Jenkins. They didn't know that her father, Arthur, hadn't been a traveling salesman who died of a heart attack. Her father had been a freelance logistics coordinator, a polite term for a black market arms smuggler who operated out of Lebanon. She had grown up in Beirut, surrounded by mercenaries, warlords, and danger, until she was 19. She learned the language because she had to survive. Her father had crossed a brutal Russian syndicate led by a man named Viktor Volkov. They dragged him out of their apartment in the dead of night. She hid in a false compartment under the floorboards, listening to her father's execution. She fled to America the next day, changed her name, gained 80 pounds to alter her appearance, and buried herself in the anonymous hustle of the service industry. She couldn't let Elijah dig into her past. If he pulled the wrong thread, the Russians would find her. My past is none of your business, Mr. Costa, she said, keeping her voice cold. Would you like dessert? I want the truth, he replied, leaning forward, his eyes burning into hers. You're hiding something. A woman with your fire doesn't spend her life serving steaks to arrogant fools unless she's trying to stay invisible. Who are you hiding from, Chloe? Before she could formulate a biting response, the front doors of the Astor room shattered. It wasn't a subtle entrance. The heavy glass exploded inward, showering the hostess stand in crystalline shards. The refined classical music playing over the speakers was instantly drowned out by the deafening roar of automatic gunfire. Screens erupted. Diners threw themselves to the plush carpet, overturning tables of fine china and expensive wine. Her instincts, buried under 7 years of peaceful, mundane life in New York, instantly resurrected. She didn't freeze. She dropped her serving tray, the silver crashing to the floor, and immediately dove behind the heavy oak pillar near table 4. Elijah's men reacted with terrifying speed, drawing weapons from their tailored suits, returning fire toward the front entrance. Elijah himself flipped the massive mahogany dining table, creating a heavy wooden barricade, and dragged her down behind it with him. His large hand gripped her arm, his face inches from hers, completely unbothered by the chaos around him. Stay down, he commanded, over the sound of bullets tearing through the restaurant's expensive upholstery. Chloe peeked around the edge of the overturned table. 3 men in heavy tactical gear were advancing through the dining room. They weren't aiming randomly. They were moving with precise military coordination, converging entirely on Elijah's position. But it wasn't their tactics that made her blood freeze. It was the leader. He had a black ski mask pulled over his face, but his right sleeve was rolled up, revealing a very specific, intricate tattoo of a 2-headed eagle clutching a bloody dagger on his forearm. The Volkov Syndicate, the men who murdered her father. Panic, sharp and blinding, clawed at her throat. They hadn't come for her. They were clearly here to assassinate Elijah Costa, who was encroaching on their shipping territories. But if they saw her face, if anyone from her past recognized the daughter of Arthur the smuggler, she was dead. Dominic took a bullet to the shoulder and went down hard, blood spraying across the patterned carpet. Elijah cursed, drawing a sleek black handgun from a shoulder holster, returning fire, but he was pinned down. The Russians were advancing, flanking the table. Elijah was outgunned, and in about 10 seconds they were going to execute him right next to her. She looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on the flambe station that had been abandoned by a waiter mid-service. A pan of sizzling brandy and a heavy cast-iron skillet sat over an open butane flame just 3 feet away. Chloe didn't think. She moved. Throwing her weight forward, she scrambled on her hands and knees, ignoring Elijah's shout to stay put. She grabbed the handle of the cast-iron skillet, inherently heavy but fueled by pure adrenaline. Standing up and completely exposing herself, she hurled the boiling, flaming contents of the pan directly into the face of the advancing Russian leader. The man screamed, dropping his weapon as the flaming brandy ignited his mask. He flailed backward, breaking their tactical formation. The momentary distraction was all Elijah needed. He rose smoothly from behind the table, his gun barking twice. The other 2 assassins dropped to the floor, instantly dead. The burning leader stumbled, and Elijah put a bullet in his chest, ending his screams. The restaurant fell into a ringing, horrific silence, save for the moans of the wounded and the crackle of the small fire Chloe had started. She stood there panting, staring at the dead men with the 2-headed eagle tattoos. Her cover was blown. The police would come. They would take fingerprints. They would run her name. Elijah lowered his gun and turned to look at her. His pristine suit was covered in plaster dust and blood, but his eyes were wide with shock. He looked at the heavy cast-iron pan still gripped in her trembling hand, then up to her face. Sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. "We need to go," Elijah said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. He didn't ask if she was okay. He grabbed her wrist in an iron grip. "The police cannot find you here, and neither can whoever sent them. You're coming with me." "I can't," she choked out, trying to pull back, her weight making it a struggle, but his strength was overwhelming. "My life is here. Your life is over," Elijah snapped, pulling her toward the kitchen exits. "You just saved a Mafia boss from a Russian hit squad. You belong to my world now." Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the armored Mercedes G-Wagon as they tore down the FDR Drive, leaving the flashing blue and red lights of Midtown Manhattan far behind. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, pumped through her veins, masking the terror that should have paralyzed her. Chloe sat in the back seat, staring at the blood drying on her uniform apron. Next to her, Elijah Costa was calmly wrapping a linen handkerchief around the superficial graze on his forearm. He hadn't spoken since dragging her out of the kitchen of the Astor room. The silence was heavier than the Kevlar plating lining the SUV doors. "Montauk," Elijah finally instructed his driver. A quiet mountain of a man named Enzo. He turned his dark gaze toward her. "Now, Chloe, or whatever your real name is, you have exactly 2 hours to convince me not to hand you over to the Volkovs as a peace offering." Leaning back against the plush leather, she didn't flinch. The girl who cowered from high school bullies was dead. The woman who had thrown boiling brandy into a hitman's face had taken her place. "If you hand me over, Viktor Volkov will torture me, kill me, and then he will kill you anyway," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady over the hum of the engine. "He doesn't share territory, Elijah. You know that. He's pushing into your East Coast shipping lanes because he secured a new route out of the Mediterranean. A route my father built." Elijah's eyes narrowed, the calculation in them evident even in the dim streetlights flashing by. "Who was your father?" "Arthur Mitchell." The name landed like a physical blow. Elijah sat up straighter, the calm facade cracking for a fraction of a second. Even in the insulated underworld of New York, Arthur Mitchell's reputation as the ghost architect of the Levantine smuggling routes was legendary. Arthur was executed 7 years ago, Elijah said slowly, studying her face, tracing the lines of her jaw, the fullness of her cheeks. He didn't have any heirs, only a teenage daughter who disappeared. I didn't disappear. I adapted, she countered, crossing her arms over her chest. I gained 80 pounds, dyed my hair, changed my name, and scrubbed toilets in Queens until I could get a waitress job. Nobody looks twice at the fat girl, Elijah. They look right through her. It was the perfect camouflage. A low chuckle vibrated in his chest. It wasn't mocking. It was genuine respect. They were fools. The men in that restaurant, my own associates, they looked at your size and saw weakness. But I saw the way you balanced those trays, the way you commanded the space around your tables. You didn't shrink yourself, and tonight, you moved like a soldier. He reached out, his long, calloused fingers gently brushing a streak of soot from her cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core, a stark contrast to the violence they had just survived. Victor thinks he absorbed my father's network, she continued, forcing her focus away from his touch. But my father didn't keep digital ledgers. He was paranoid. He kept everything in encrypted notebooks, and he made me memorize the ciphers. I know the blind spots in the port of Newark. I know which customs agents are on Volkov's payroll, and exactly how much it takes to turn them. You have the muscle, Elijah, but I have the blueprint to dismantle Viktor Volkov's empire from the inside out. For the rest of the drive to the sprawling, heavily fortified estate on the cliffs of Montauk, they built a war council in the back seat of the Mercedes. Over the next 4 days, the safe house became a command center. The dynamic between them shifted rapidly from captor and captive to a lethal partnership. They spent hours hunched over architectural blueprints of shipping yards and manifests from the Maersk shipping lines. Chloe dictated encryption keys from memory, exposing the rotting foundation of Volkov's logistics. Elijah watched her work with an intensity that made her skin flush. He didn't treat her like a liability. He didn't treat her like a fragile porcelain doll. He treated her like a queen moving pieces on a chessboard. He ordered meals tailored to her tastes, replacing her ruined uniform with expensive flowing silk loungewear that complemented her curves rather than trying to compress them. "You're brilliant," he murmured one evening, standing behind her chair as she mapped out a rerouted shipment of contraband weapons meant for Volkov's men. He rested his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing circles against her skin. "For years you hid this mind behind a waitress's apron." "Survival isn't always glamorous," she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "It's over now," Elijah promised, his voice dropping an octave, dark and absolute. "You aren't hiding anymore. We lay the trap tomorrow night. And when it's done, Volkov will know exactly who bested him." Terminal 4 at the Red Hook container port was a desolate, rusting graveyard of steel on a Tuesday at 3 a.m. A freezing, relentless rain pounded against the concrete, turning the floodlights into blurry halos. Standing inside the glass-walled overseer's booth suspended above the yard, Chloe watched the monitors with a hawk's focus. She was wearing a tailored black trench coat, her hair pulled back sharply. Elijah stood beside her, a suppressed Sig Sauer P226 resting loosely in his grip. Down below, a convoy of 4 black Escalades rolled into the yard. They had fed a specific, irresistible piece of false intelligence through Volkov's turned customs agent. They let him believe Elijah Costa was personally overseeing the arrival of a massive shipment of uncut diamonds from Sierra Leone, guarded by only a skeleton crew. It was a bait too arrogant for Volkov to ignore. The heavy doors of the lead SUV opened, and Viktor Volkov stepped out into the rain. He was older than Chloe remembered from that horrific night in Beirut, his silver hair slicked back, his posture radiating unearned superiority. His men fanned out, assault rifles raised, sweeping the muddy yard. "It's too quiet," Volkov barked in Russian, his voice carrying over the hidden parabolic microphones they had planted. "Where is the Costa bastard?" Reaching forward, Chloe hit the switch on the control console. Instantly, the massive automated floodlights surrounding the perimeter snapped on, blinding Volkov's crew. Simultaneously, the hydraulic locks on the steel shipping containers encircling them hissed open. Elijah's men poured out of the steel boxes, dozens of them, heavily armed and holding the high ground. In less than 10 seconds, Volkov's elite hit squad was entirely surrounded, outgunned and outmaneuvered. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. Elijah picked up the PA microphone, his voice booming over the yard like the voice of a vengeful god. "Drop the weapons, Victor, unless you want to die in the mud." Realizing he was beaten, Volkov raised his hands, screaming at his men to stand down. Weapons clattered onto the wet concrete. Elijah looked at Chloe, nodding once. It was time. They descended the metal staircase together, the rain immediately soaking her hair. They walked purposefully through the ring of armed men, stepping into the center of the trap. Volkov blared at Elijah with venomous hatred, but his eyes slid right past her, dismissing her as a secretary or a coat holder. It was the exact same mistake Elijah had made on the first night they met. It was the mistake that would be his last. "You think you've won, Costa?" Volkov spat, water dripping from his chin. "My network is untouchable. Kill me, and 10 others will take my place. You don't have the codes. You don't have the logistics." "I don't," Elijah agreed smoothly, stepping aside. "But she does." Volkov finally looked at her. Really looked at her. Chloe stepped forward, pulling her shoulders back, letting him see every inch of the woman he had created when he orphaned a 19-year-old girl. "Your Mediterranean route through Cyprus is frozen," she said, her voice echoing clearly in the quiet yard. "Your customs agent in Newark, Agent Miller, just wired his savings to an offshore account and vanished. And the $3 million in illegal firearms you expected tonight? They were seized by the Coast Guard 20 minutes ago based on an anonymous tip containing your personal digital signature." Volkov's face drained of color. His jaw worked silently as he stared at her, a flicker of horrific recognition sparking in his cold eyes. "Arthur Mitchell was a cautious man," she continued, closing the distance until she was only a few feet away from her father's murderer. "But he made sure his daughter knew everything. You thought you killed the threat in Beirut, Victor. You only delayed it, Katerina." Volkov whispered the name, slipping out like a curse. "It's Chloe now," she corrected coldly. Elijah stepped up beside her, a silent, lethal guardian. He didn't gloat. He didn't offer a monologue. The hard karma had already been delivered. The arrogant king had been dethroned by the very person he thought was beneath his notice. "Take him away," Elijah ordered his men. "Make sure the police find him with the evidence of the illegal firearms purchase. Let him rot in a federal cage." As Volkov was dragged away screaming obscenities into the rainy night, the heavy weight that had sat on Chloe's chest for 7 long years finally evaporated. She took a deep, shuddering breath of the cold air. Elijah turned to her, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. The danger in his eyes had softened into absolute adoration. He reached out, pulling her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her waist. She didn't care about the rain or the blood or the audience of armed men. She buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of rain and expensive cologne. "You destroyed him," Elijah whispered against her ear. "We destroyed him," she corrected, pulling back to look into his eyes. "So, what happens now?" Elijah asked, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Does the brilliant strategist go back to serving steaks at the Astor Room?" "Not a chance," she smiled back, feeling the true extent of her power for the first time. "I think the Costa Syndicate needs a new logistics director, and I don't work for minimum wage." Elijah laughed, a rich, full sound that echoed over the quiet docks. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, claiming kiss that promised both danger and absolute devotion. She was no longer the fat waitress trying to disappear into the background. She was the architect of her own empire, and she was exactly where she belonged. Did you love this story of ultimate revenge, power, and a heroine who completely outsmarts the underworld? Don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves the story where the arrogant villain gets exactly what they deserve. Subscribe to the channel for more thrilling audio stories, and let me know in the comments what kind of twist you want to hear next.